What makes the current moment so very, very interesting for our discussions is that here, that is in the media package, there is a new player, and that player promises dialogue. It's called ChatGPT for a reason. It promises that it is dialogical, and in many ways it is dialogical, and that type of media interactivity on a sophisticated level with amazing speed has simply not existed before. And that changes everything, and it certainly changes the classroom situation and the learning environment. And that makes it so interesting and so important to look at that player and try to understand it as best as we can, because the player is not transparent. It's not transparently constructed. In many other parameters are not accessible to us. Artificial intelligence and machine learning is everywhere, absolutely everywhere. We cannot go through a day without consuming and being part of artificial intelligence. The least successful at the moment, artificial intelligence is the least successful with regard to moving images. Simple explanation, too big. Too many data, our computer power can't handle it. That doesn't mean that artificial intelligence doesn't play a very important role. There's not a single blockbuster film, there's not a single large-scale video game that doesn't use artificial intelligence. Machine learning, artificial intelligence is, for example, the kind of technology that creates transitions between scenes. So you give a machine that has absorbed a lot of images, you give it one scene, you give it another scene, and it creates the transition. That's an extremely powerful technology, saves a lot of money. But what we don't have yet, and what we will have, it's a question of time, we will have, not too long, a technology where you choose what topic you like to view that evening, and the artificial intelligence will create a product for you. So you want to have a film about Hitler, then the machine will come and create a version of Hitler, not based on quotes, but actually creating the images based on probabilities. It will certainly happen. And you can twist this and give it input as you like. AI is fantastic with regard to text, because text is small data in comparison, and there it is absolutely stunning what can be done. And it's in this world that AI is very dialogical, at least very interactive. Here's the precursor of ChatGPT. I would expect that ChatGPT is trained with the same data, and this gives you an idea where the data is coming from. A lot of it is simply electronic book, digital books, and a vast amount, the majority of material, is web-based material. These large language models digest texts that are sexist, racist, and especially the first generations of machines tended very quickly to begin to swear. Because of all the trash that's in there, right? So they have a structural affinity to trash. Now we should be very careful in condemning the machine, because it's our trash that is being thrown back at us, right? But that question, how do you deal with that structural problem? How do you make the machine perhaps cleaner? How do you make the machine think against patterns? Some patterns, but not against others. That's precisely one of the important challenges now. And you can. You already made the experience, I'm sure, that you gave some input and then you argued against the machine, and it changed track. It changed patterns. It developed in another direction. And it has also learned by now what I would call modesty. But the most very important to understand is what is happening hectically at the moment in many different locations are the training phases. And the training phases are twofold. One of them is the digesting of the huge amount of data, right? And that's one of them. And at the moment, that's then concluded. And then the next phase starts, and that's ongoing, where you play with the machine in order to have more acceptable output. Right? And output that makes the consumers and the users. So at the moment, if you look at Chat, it does all kinds of things. It has these gestures of modesty, right? Where it says, I don't know, I'm not sure, I'm not an expert, right? You've experienced that. It has what it's called what's called hallucinations, right? And the most important example, I'm sure you're aware of that, is the New York Times reporter who was prompted by Chat to leave his wife and marry ChatGPT. Was one of the most powerful, maybe, hallucinations. Hallucinations are when the machine, prompted by input, shifts patterns, right? And some of these patterns make sense to us. It argues against itself. Some of these patterns we consider completely inappropriate. But it's the pattern shifting that takes place. And because of the focus and amazing ability to recognize and replicate patterns, including patterns we don't know, that it knows, this machine is fantastic at genre, or I would say text types. It can set itself on a trajectory with relatively little input. It recognizes which pattern, and then it goes there, and quite consistently. And again, I come back to some examples of that. The students are in a setting where they, at least at times, also feel scripted. You know, they feel that teachers, institutions, maybe parents, pushing them in certain ways, right? So they are in a situation where, okay, I gotta understand the pattern. Where am I supposed to go here, right? What is the politically correct statement or the right answer? And in the humanities, it's not math, it's, you know, values and all kinds of things. So, intriguingly, the student is in a very similar situation than the artificial intelligence. It's trying to understand a script, and this is where artificial intelligence comes in. It tells you what the script is, and it allows you to perform the script. And in that sense, that affinity is one of the and then of course you can also say simple efficiency is the reason why, in terms of teaching, it's everywhere and will never disappear again. Absolutely, never disappear again. And all of us have been in the situation where we absorbed texts not knowing that they were machine generated. First problem for historians or anybody interested in the past and the present, they are always belated. They're always behind because of the first phase. You train it in the first phase and you're done with that, and then you start manipulating. So at the moment, for example, at least when I checked last a few weeks ago, ChatGPT was absolutely convinced that Elizabeth II is the reigning monarch of Britain, right? So they are not up to date. They are behind the curve in very problematic ways because, as we emphasize, we always construct history from the present. And it is not in the present. It's already outdated when we get to play with it. It's a serious problem. The next one for historians, and I think for anybody with a respect for history, is a big problem. Truthfulness is not a category, a register of large language models. It does not have truth. It cannot recognize truth in terms of input. It cannot recognize truth in terms of output. This is not something that this machine is capable of doing. It's probability and plausibility, not referentiality. And because probability is closely linked to plausibility, also culturally, therefore, it is actually very good probably at memory. Collective memories, it's good at reproducing them. History, facts, not so much. Absolutely not. And closely linked to that, it doesn't have what I would call a vertical text memory. It cannot point to a source because there is no source. That's also why the texts are not found by our plagiarism software, not yet, right? Because this text doesn't exist because it's probability that arises from millions of texts, right? There is no source. It can't pinpoint to a source. So if you ask it to generate footnotes, it does that, but it generates plausibly looking footnote, not accurate footnotes, and I'll show you the difference in an example in a minute. Now this is a really big problem at the moment. Because of the secondary phase, these machines are heavily and crudely censored. So at the moment, for example, you cannot ask the machine to engage in a dialogue with you about the problem of history and memory that is most important for German society. What is the relationship between Holocaust uniqueness and the crimes of colonialism? How are we squaring this or not squaring this? You cannot tell the machine, give me a list of arguments that speak against understanding the Holocaust as a unique event. It shuts down. Because OpenAI has absolutely no interest in violating history laws that exist in Germany and other places, and therefore it is a crude way of censoring. So some of the most important, some of the most controversial topics are therefore disappearing. And what becomes interesting is if we as historians, for example, could curate our own machine, right? When we have control over the first phase, what goes into the machine, the result will be totally different. But those are a lot of loaded ethical questions. Where do we begin? Which of our classics are good enough? You know, is Ranke good enough, despite the fact that he's a despicable nationalist? It's a very, very important question, that who's supposed to make that decision? It should be a democratic one. But if we can feed our own, which is extraordinarily laborious, then we get very, very different outputs. This is my input. Write a brief description, scenes, geographic. Relatively clear what I wanted, and this is what it produces. It has the adjectives. It's a harrowing campaign. It gives you a scene of the soldiers struggling through the dense undergrowth. Also recognize it gives you a scene without any blood and gore. Yeah, that's already, it's cleaned up. That's part of that's the censorship part. It calls it fierce and brutal, but it doesn't show you any brutality, no vivid images. And it then also gives you the description of the characters. They're brave and they provide sacrifices. Fantastically, it's a snapshot. You know, frozen in time, kind of, giving you a scene. It understands description. It understands historical description. I knows what pattern is behind it. That's the next exercise. Here I was asking for a narration. Called it narrative history. Emphasized that it needs actors and agents, and that time is important, before, during, and after. And it does this beautifully. It has the time markers here, at the outset, throughout, ultimately. It creates suspense. Right here, not to be underestimated. Right, it's open in there. Right, it tells you, hey, there's something exciting happening here. It has therefore a turning point, and it has a result. Right, the Battle of Gallipoli helped to create the identity of modern-day Turkey. This is a beautiful narrative. All the parameters are in place. I would argue it knows the patterns. It knows the last one. You know, this is the assertive text, and I give you another example afterwards when it becomes really problematic. This is, I'm telling, quite a compelling argument. This is I'm already gesturing towards the counterfactual here, right? Because I would blame the British leadership. And I'm telling it here, make a case why, you know, Winston Churchill is not to be blamed for the outcome, the catastrophic outcome, very, very clearly identified. And it gives you here, while you might want to blame Churchill, it's very complex. You have to realize the Ottoman Empire was stronger than we expected. Then, of course, there were also problems of logistical challenges. Well, maybe that Churchill should have thought about them. And also, there's some measure of success ultimately. So ultimately, it's unfair to blame Churchill. Quite good, you know. If you're not an expert of the Battle of Gallipoli, you might buy that. The next attempt, I'm going down here a slippery slope. The next one is, I'm calling it counterfactual, right? Now I'm asking for a meta level, you know. First I asked for different, my theory was there are different types of history, it seems to know the patterns. Now I'm asking for even meta level to think, go counterfactual on me, right? And it realizes counterfactuality because it talks here also about, it speaks in the subjunctive with a more carefully crafted plan, right? It wasn't carefully planned, with a more carefully planned. So it recognizes subjunctive and can deliver text in the mode of subjunctive, and that is quite, I would say, quite impressive. And it then, you know, praises Churchill counterfactually, and it at the end also says this is a counterfactual scenario, right? And this is pretty good. I mean, it does also know the pattern of counterfactual. That now two very problematic points. I ask it for the narrative history to provide footnotes, right? And as the situation was 6 months ago, when I also checked, it is terrible at journal articles. Cannot, you know. What is here, and it's beautifully how it's done. The author is an author who is an expert in the field. The title is invented, but the title is a title that reflects the kind of titles that he has written. The journal is in existence, but the journal ended at number 41. So the whole thing is totally invented and totally plausible, right? A true expert, a true journal, a plausible sounding title, and the whole thing is a disaster, right? And this has been like this before. Why is it? Because it's dealing in probability. It can find the person, it can find the topic, and it can therefore construct something plausible, but not something true, because it is not yet good at searching. The way this works, when you ask, my hypothesis is when you ask the machine to create references, it creates after the fact references to its textual output. So this is the search side. And it is very good at recognizing patterns, creating them. It's very bad at searching. But of course, that side, which is, I would say, is part of the second phase, will get much, much better in the future. So the machine will get much, much better. It